Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express-News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, and I'm joined by
Carrie Clark, columnist, editorial board.
Nancy Pryor-Johnson, deputy editorial board editor.
Metro editor Greg Jefferson.
I promise I'm not going to devote too much of this podcast to venting about my jealousy toward Carrie, because you got to see Ohtani hit a home run in Houston yesterday. I got that all out of my system before we started, but that must have been incredible.
It was.
So we're going to talk about the city budget, which was the proposed budget was presented to City Council last week. We're going to talk about what's been going on the border, specifically Eagle Pass. I wanted to start by talking about a story which ran in the Express News a week ago, written by Molly Smith, and it was kind of looking at Mayor Ron Nirenberg's future. And I mean, there were some things that I didn't know. I didn't realize he'd made 7 trips to D.C. last year and 4 this year. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Greg, you edited that story, right?
I did, yeah.
You did. So, I mean, I guess the story is really looking at his prospects for an appointment in the Biden administration. What are those prospects, you think?
Well, I mean, let's start by saying that rumors of his, almost as soon as it became clear that Joe Biden was elected president in 2020, the rumors started about Nirenberg maybe having some place in the Biden administration. The early thought was, maybe in HUD, whether that was a secretary position or below, or labor. That kind of faded over time. It just didn't happen. But lately, particularly after the worst of the pandemic, he seemed to be getting a lot more attention from D.C., and his travel to Washington kind of ramped up a little bit more than what he'd been doing before. So we had, 7 trips last year and this year. He appeared with Joe Biden in kind of a press event in which Biden was announcing new heat mitigation measures for cities across the country. Mm-hmm. It was just Nirenberg appearing remotely, just on a video screen, and the mayor of Phoenix. That's a pretty that's a pretty rarefied place to be for a big city mayor. So that got people really focused on Nirenberg. And he followed that up with a spot on ABC News that night. He was on CNN. He was on Face of the Nation the following Sunday morning. I think the event with Biden was on a Wednesday or Thursday. So yeah, just a lot of attention in a very short period of time. And I think political watchers said, that doesn't happen unless the Biden administration is kind of testing, kind of putting him through his paces.
Seeing how he performed on the national stage.
Yeah, exactly. Can he deliver under pressure? And we don't know what their assessment was of Nirenberg's performance at the news conference or on news programs afterwards. He's not a natural politician. I think, as we pointed out in the story, he's not a magnetic speaker. That's for sure.
Kind of wonky.
Yeah, a lot of technocratic jargon, but he performed pretty well, nice and steady. And I think a lot of this, part of the reason for the attention he's getting is because he gets really high marks for how he and Bexar County Judge Nelson Wolff kind of conducted themselves and led the city and the county through the pandemic. I mean, if you'll recall, they were a presence, they were a fixture in your household every night. Yeah. They did news conference update, and people actually kind of became dependent on, It was like the one thing in the day where you're getting straight information about where the city's at as far as hospitalization rates and death rates and what you can do to prevent, the spread. Yeah. And that was just really powerful. And he did really well in kind of getting the city through that. So that positioned him, I think, really well with the Biden administration.
A couple of things about this are, that there is no vacancy at the moment for cabinet positions. So that's kind of, that can change, overnight. The other thing is that, when Julian Castro, for example, took his position at HUD in the Obama administration, it was the second term for Obama. So it's clearly going to be a short-term thing. Of course, there was also thought that he might be Hillary Clinton's running mate. So that was also in the wind. Mm-hmm. But it was going to be a 2.5-year gig for him. In this case, if something opened up, next week, and he got an offer. We're 15 months away from the election,
Right.
and Joe Biden could get voted out, and so it's you leave the mayor's office for what could be very short,
right,
term situation. If on the other hand, something you wait or something opens up after Biden gets reelected, if he gets reelected, right, then you're getting into the final months of Nirenberg's mayoral tenure, and does it even make sense to leave office 4 months or 3 months
right,
before you're done?
Yeah. I mean, I would point out that Marty Walsh, he had been the labor secretary under Biden, former mayor of Boston, big supporter of Ron Nirenberg's. He stepped down. He left to lead the hockey union.
Yeah, they've got they have like a kind of an acting.
Does anybody like hockey? They know what the union's called. I don't offhand. Anyway, he's leading it. So there's an interim appointee right now. So like that's kind of out there. Yeah. But I think a lot of the people Molly Smith talked to in reporting this story said, it's much more likely that the Biden administration will see how the election goes. If he wins a second term, there's inevitably going to be a lot of turnover, a lot of secretaries and undersecretaries are just going to say, you know what, it was a good term. Time for me to move on. Time to kind of rejuvenate the administration with new people.
Yep.
And that could be his opening. And if that's the case, it would make a lot of sense for Nirenberg to jump. At that point, he would have very little left in his final term in office. And, it's like we have yet to see what his last 2 years in office is really going to be about. We don't know. Yeah. Are there any projects that he's so deeply invested in that he just has to see it through to the very, very end? I don't know. I don't know that that's the case.
I think the timing is more likely to what you said with second term, because this is very reminiscent of the attention that President Obama was giving to Julian.
Yeah.
But remember that was like 2 years, because you start off. I mean, it's actually before he's picked to be the convention keynote in 2012.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's not until July 2014 that Obama makes the decision. So it wouldn't make sense for the mayor to go to D.C. at this point, because he just said if should Biden lose and next year. But if the timing actually turns out right for at the end of November 2024, and it is just a few months, and whatever will be what's the big project on the mayor's plate right now, and maybe it's probably the stadiums. You would think it may be close to being resolved by.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe. No, we've got
we may have an election. I mean, we may have put that to the vote.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
in November of next year.
Right. Yeah. As far as any updates on the possibility of a Spurs arena downtown, I mean, it's going to be a while.
Yeah.
I mean, the city really is at the in the very early stages with the Spurs right now. They're still locked down, by the way, totally. They're not releasing any information, but we've got sources telling us that it's probably going to be a year or so.
If you think about the projects that he may be interested in, advanced rapid transit, the airport, these are things that I don't know that he would necessarily feel like I need to hang around to
workforce program as well.
The workforce program. That's
and he did say, I mean, in the article, it's Molly closes and says that he's committed to staying here throughout his term. I mean, of course, I can say that as well.
Yeah,
I can't say.
We're to check out Julian's quotes maybe a month before he took the job.
Back they all have to say that. Yeah, you have to that he's committed to it. But I do see some changes from him. I do see he's evolved and he's growing and becoming more personable. One of the I see it actually a couple of weeks ago, and he spoke at the San Antonio Hispanic Journalists Gala. And he gave a speech, and I feel like I saw a different side of him. I thought it was really strong. I personally love how he puts his family first, and always has his wife Erica Prosper go and give a speech as well. And she lately, I've seen some different stuff lately from her too that's interesting. On her Instagram, she'll post these little videos of him sometimes like working out. There was something funny that she just posted about how he's trying to protect their garage against her driving, kind of thing, like buffer it, which my husband did that too once. So it kind of shows just like a personal level, his human side, right? And his relationship, fatherhood, being a husband. I mean,
to me, it's like, okay, if you need to do a special production for Instagram to show your human side, you're probably not doing. But you're probably not doing enough in public life, in what you're actually doing to connect with the people around.
I haven't heard anything.
Is it a production or is this for real?
No, I think it's for real. I think it's real because I don't think, like for instance, what she puts out there on Instagram for the one where he was working out, and he just kind of looked at her like, "Oh, brother, like really." And so it didn't look like it was planned at all, and it did look like he was a little annoyed with her.
I think his ideal lane, given his, as you said, he's not a natural politician, is to maybe go with the Al Gore kind of mocking his own nerdiness. Maybe when Al Gore did the you want to see me do the Macarena again and stuff like that. That kind of like that kind of like I'm really nerdy and I'm going to make fun of myself and maybe people will.
Right. So you found a middle ground between Nancy.
I'm trying.
I would hope that whatever the position the cabinet, if it's a cabinet position, that it's not HUD, just so we can break that
tradition of it.
That tradition.
I mean, HUD would actually make some sense because the city's done a lot of
does, but so does transportation.
Transportation, yeah. That would be good. Workforce. I mean, he's trying to.
Yeah. Actually, he was. It was. They talked about. I think it was. Obama directly talked to Castro about transportation. But Secretary, and he just.
And HUD would be good. I'd just like to see a sanitary mayor
just to kind of like that.
Go to labor,
And I mean, we don't really see necessarily any. I mean, when I think about. Talk to him about this, but when I think about where he would, if this does not happen, like where he would go from there, I don't really see like an elective office necessarily. I could see him being home to the university, a nonprofit, something like that. Maybe there are other things. I mean, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always, barring any kind of federal government appointment. I mean, I just kind of saw him going to a university. I mean, I could,
and he came from a university. He was at Trinity.
Would be like his natural environment. That would be his pond. I could be totally wrong. I mean, now watch. He'll like get a some amazing Fortune 500 job, but I just see him in a think tank.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the city's proposed budget. Eric Welch presented it to City Council last Thursday. It's $3.7 billion, $1.6 billion for the general fund. I mean, some of the bullet points I think would be we're going to see the homestead exemption increased for homeowners from 10% to 20%. The council approved that a couple of months ago. 105 more SAPD uniformed positions. And we were talking just before we started, Nancy, about it. And the thing that stood out to me when I heard him talk about the budget really had to do with animal care services, which I think has been a big issue in this city, particularly in the last few months.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it went from, their budget is going up from $21.4 million to $27 million for ACS, right? I mean, of course, you had in February the Ruben Nahara, the fatal mauling. And so that is, they had to do something. They had to, and they had to do it in a big way. And, unfortunately, it's after that horrible death, and there have been some other incidents as well. But they're not skirting the issue, right, Carrie? I mean, they're definitely talking about what a big problem it is. The numbers don't look good. The situation doesn't look good. And so they're really trying to beef it up. And I don't think that they're trying to brush anything under the rug. They know we have a problem. They know that they hear about this from the community. On the surveys, it's the I believe it was number one. It was at the top. Top three for sure. For sure, top three of the problems that the community complains about and says they need relief on. It would have been a really bad look if they didn't do it. And so I think that this is something that's a really positive change. Hopefully we can see the fruits that it bears quickly, right? And other issues like this don't happen. But it's quite a bit of money, but it will still take time. It's not going to be overnight.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we learned last week, kind of as part of all the budget talk and news of the increase in ACS's budget, is the fact that over the previous year, they were responding to 44% of calls, complaint, to animal control. That's wow. I mean,
like not even
hurting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not bad.
Yeah.
So I think the thought is, I think Eric Walsh was, he said this, that hiring, you're talking about 8 hires, I believe, with the new funding.
Yeah.
That will go toward maybe getting closer to, I don't know, like 100%.
Yeah.
of responses to those phone calls. I mean, it's
like a 3-year plan.
Right.
I think they're going to go from 44% to try to get to 64 this year, and then up to maybe
85, and then going
in the third year maybe.
Yeah.
But I mean, he said they get 50,000 critical calls a year. So that's roughly 28,000 that just they're like there's no response to this. Right now.
This is what haunts me. I mean, it should haunt everyone. Is that I think it was a revelation to all of us when the city first came in a few months ago after the Marlene death, and we learned just how underfunded the department is. Mm-hmm. And if that gentleman isn't killed, nothing's changing. I mean, it's because it took him being mauled to death.
An 81-year-old man.
And yet when you look at the numbers, and it just doesn't seem that these numbers are right, that you don't have enough personnel to address all these calls, and it's just a shame it took to this, but maybe it will save people in the future.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to this. It'd be interesting to see what the rates are like in other cities, and it just felt like the scope of this problem had been so huge that they just had maybe, I'm not saying they'd accepted the situation, but just thought we don't have the resources to deal with it, and then now they've decided we're going to have
because they were getting the complaints before. It's not the complaints aren't different now. They were already getting them, and this is definitely reactive, obviously, in the worst way. But it would have been terrible if they wouldn't have done anything at all. Yeah. So this is definitely a good thing.
Wanted to finish by talking about an issue that we've addressed a lot on the podcast, which is what's going on the border at Eagle Pass. Greg Abbott's Operation Lone Star. The editorial board had a great piece over the weekend looking at what was going on there. Joaquin Castro's visit. You had the family that owns the pecan farm, the Urbinas, who, I mean, this is it's a fascinating situation because they're Republicans. They, like a lot of people, we've heard a lot of stories, I think, along the Texas border, in Arizona, and elsewhere, from homeowners or property owners along the border who get very frustrated because you have migrants coming through their property, camping out there. A lot of it's an old issue. And I know that they've had a frustration with it, but they're actually very upset because the state has put concertina wire on their property. Yeah. And they're not happy about it.
I mean, the woman, Urbina, she actually watched a pregnant woman trying to get through that concertina wire, and actually said, and she's a former teacher. She's, and so she cares about people, and she's seeing this up front. And so I think humanity supersedes their politics, right? And they just see it's wrong. They, first of all, say that they're no fan of Biden and his immigration policies. And so they make that very clear, and they keep saying that as you talk to them, right? And they make sure that they get that across. But they're no fan of Abbott.
They wanted to see some kind of orderly system where people could come through.
Right. And they say they don't want an open border. They say, they're not for open border. They want it orderly. They want immigration policy. They want them to go through in a legal way and all that, but they don't want them killed. And we also saw over the weekend the 3-year-old who was killed on the bus to Chicago on the way. Right.
Which is a big part of Abbott's program, too, which is just busing migrants out of the state.
For a 3-year-old to die on the way, it's really terrible, and I saw that. I think that the statement came out, from the state on Friday, I believe. And I mean, it's just a really terrible situation. And, I have heard that on those buses, there are quite a few very, very sick, very fragile people in very bad situations. If you think about it, I mean, I've talked with migrants, who have just crossed and things. I've gone to the border. Josh Berdesky, our editor, has gone to the border as well. Our whole editorial board is gone, and we've had several reporters go there. But you talk to these migrants and the situations that they're in when they're crossing. I mean, their lives, their lives are at risk, and they have medical conditions. Now there's this wire there. I mean, it's a really bad situation, and some of them already have health problems, and then they get on these buses, and they're just trying to get in, and they're trying to get to a safe space, but they're not in the best of condition. And then so you have these security officers driving these buses, and you have this trip. I mean, they don't have a health care on that trip. They don't have, so, and I know, wasn't there another death earlier? There's another death. It wasn't a child, but there was another death. And then they started looking at their whole system and their medical care and everything. But it's just been, I think it's just a really bad look for Abbott. I think that they need to obviously look at what they're doing and how they're treating these migrants as well. And when they're so sick like that, and so, in these situations, and they have them on these buses, it's just not going to be a good thing. I foresee there's going to be other deaths happen.
Jeremy Wallace, who's done a great job covering pass for and the border for Houston Chronicle and Express News, was at a meeting last week with Congressman Joaquin Castro and some DPS officials, and Joaquin Castro told them that if the stories that have been out there are involving troopers pushing kids back into the river to kind of keep them from getting across, that if those stories are true, that he would encourage the Department of Justice to either charge them with murder or to investigate that. And so I think this is this is not something that we're used to hearing him say. I mean, he's been very critical about this is something new for him, and I think it's
critical of Biden.
Yeah, he's
critical of Biden.
Yeah, well, I think he feels, and I think there are other Democrats out there who feel the Biden administration has kind of dragged its feet in taking action against what Abbott is doing.
Next Sunday's editorial will also be critical of Biden.
Yeah.
But the thing with Abbott that gets me is he doesn't even pretend to summon any kind, just the smallest bit of human emotion or sadness. I mean, going back to the immigrants in the truck last year, he took it as opportunity to, just go after the Biden administration, express no sympathy for the people who had lost, no condolences for their families. The, two people who were drowned, including a 3-year-old Honduran boy, he refers to them in the creed as two bodies, not two human beings. His inability and unwillingness to express some kind of even manufactured sympathy. If some people have lost their lives,
if someone dies or is injured, you'll say this person who was crossing illegally. He'll have to get a shot in there.
Well, this was actually on the statement on Friday. It was from the Texas Department of Emergency Management, and that was actually the most human statement that they've made was every loss of life is a tragedy. But my thing is like, okay, but you knew this was going to happen. They know. I mean, there's so much that hasn't come to surface yet. And Jeremy Wallace and others are doing a really awesome job. Texas Tribune as well, doing a really great job trying to tell the story. But there's so much we don't know. And this story right here, I mean, there's just so much secrecy and hiding of what is really happening. And when you see this story about this 3-year-old, it just makes me think, how many others have been close to death, and what else is happening that we don't know?
We saw when Rick Perry was governor, there was kind of a war between Perry and the Obama administration over border policy. And Perry, in a very theatrical way, had state forces along the border. And Abbott, I think, has just escalated that, and to the point where it has really literally become it has become more of a literal war. Where the DPS troopers are, I think, being instructed to block the federal border officials from doing their jobs. And I don't know if there's a price to be paid for Abbott at this point politically, because both that policy, which is, the two messages that I think that go with the policies and the actions that we're seeing are, one, the administration's not doing their job on the border, so we're going to do it for them. That resonates with a lot of Republicans in the state. And also the idea of if they've made it across the border, if the migrants have made it and they've been, then send them to other states. If people in these other states, liberals think that this is okay, then let them deal with it. Yeah. And that a lot of Texans go along with that.
A lot of Texans go along with that. A lot of kind of core Republican voters across the country go along.
They budged more than 30,000 people to Democratic states.
Yeah. So, I mean, if Abbott, his name has stopped coming up as a potential, Republican candidate for the presidential nomination. I mean, there are all kinds of rumors about him positioning himself to be a vice presidential candidate.
Yeah.
And this is, his actions on the border, kind of, they don't dissuade you.
Sure.
He's not positioning.
And fundamentally, this is about, the issue of asylum, because, people have the legal right to come to a port of entry and declare or make a request for asylum. If they make it across the country between ports of entry, they have a legal right to do it. And as I interpret this is basically, we're going to try to keep them from getting to the U.S. side, so they are not going to be in a position to make that request. So we're just going to put razor wire. We're going to put these buoys here in the river. We're going to, and maybe even do more than that to try to keep them.
Make it where they're trespassing, right? Where they're trespassing. And I think, and then the Eagle Pass, I know that their park there, that was a big deal that Jeremy also reported on. And so the park, and then the mayor says, no, they went against what they originally did, which was complying with that, and said, no, we're not going to stand for that either. And so it's definitely a showdown. When you go down there to the border, it feels surreal. It's almost like, wow, is this really happening? It is, it feels really different. It feels really, it's a standoff happening.
It's true. And I get so frustrated with when it's termed, not just by Abbott, but many of the people who think alike with him, that, people are illegally crossing, because, it's, we're not seeing people sneaking across. We're seeing people who are coming in plain sight, and they're there with the intention of seeking asylum. This is not, the narrative that, as a kid who grew up along the border, I grew up in Brownsville and in Edinburgh, and that was kind of the narrative, people sneaking across the border from Mexico in one way or another. This is not that at all. These are people making long trips and saying, I want to put in make a request for asylum. And I think we have to really have a serious conversation. I just don't feel anybody, and I certainly would include Joe Biden in this, has not done a good job of explaining to the American public the asylum process and how we should handle it. And of course, his policy, this recent policy, he perpetuated Title 42, which is turning people away, the Trump policy, for a while. And then when that went away, it's like, you have to have an app and you have to make an appointment. Yeah. I know you all are going to deal with all this stuff this weekend with what he's doing, but I just don't feel anybody. I've been waiting for a political figure, and I think Obama did many things well. He was a gifted politician. I don't think anybody that I can think of has really broken down this issue and explained it to the public and said, this is challenging, it's difficult, but this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it.
It's too politically lucrative, though. I mean, if you think about it, this is the one issue, because it hasn't been solved, and I think we've talked about it before on here, but this is the fight. This is the fight, and both sides get something out of the fight, and of not solving it. And who suffers? The migrants and the people coming over who are the most vulnerable people, who are escaping situations. I mean, it blows my mind when they tell me these stories. It's like, well, you can't blame them for trying to save their own lives and the lives of their kids. And they're not sneaking across or coming over. They waved at us. Like Jerry Lauder, a photographer, and we went out there, and these families with little tiny kids are holding them, walking through the water, and they waved at us, and they're exhausted.
I think Democrats get less out of it.
Yeah, they do. They do get less, but it's still the fight.
It's such a polarized and it's such a red meat issue. But there's no one that's on the other hand, because there's no one there's no Democrat who can brag about what I've done.
Right.
Well,
right.
I think Democrats are comfortable making critiques, and I think they're justified in these critiques when it comes to Abbott and that sort of thing, and some of the things Trump did with family separation, for example. but I think Democrats are much less comfortable putting forward, this is what we should be doing. Whereas I think Republicans like Trump are very, I think they're more comfortable owning. As you said, he's not backing away from that. He's not apologizing for anything. Trump didn't apologize for anything.
I mean, it's easier to say you're cutting them off and close it and, put razor wire out there. It's the barbaric thing to do, right? It's so much easier to do that than to try to figure out the foundations of why this is happening, the roots of why it's happening. And then you have to think about every country where people are coming from. It's different reasons why, right? There are political problems there. Their climate is part of it as well. I mean, it's very complicated, and it's dynamic. I mean, it changes, and we're just kind of at their mercy of everything that's happening over there, and then bam, they're here. They want to come.
And like the climate,
yes,
going to get
what are you going to do?
Worse. I mean, it's going to get exponentially worse, and
and I don't want to get too far off the topic, but it's it was fascinating to read about. I didn't know this until recently when the Express News had a piece about the fact that we went 6 years in San Antonio from 72 through 77 without a single day of 100-degree temperature. How many had this summer? Like 50 something? I know, whatever. And a lot of 105.
Wait till
And so I don't look. I've read the science. I know no scientist, but that was pretty persuasive today. Something you have to look at that and think.
I mean, what's happening in Hawaii? I mean, it's horrible reading about all that. All this is connected. It's really some terrible stuff happening.
It is. We want to thank everybody for listening. I hope everyone's doing well, and we'll be back with you all next week. Take care.